Martial World Teyvat Chapter 3b, Fan Fiction by Azazyel. I held the heavy bronze key and with the address firmly impressed into my memory along with where the address was on a map of the city limits of Liyue, I realized there wasn't anything else to do other than get a move on. All too soon, I reached my new home. It was a 2-story, 3-bedroom house with a walled-in yard with an overhanging archway gate. I had to use the house's master key to get into. Looking around, I saw the large shed/possible guest house I knew would become my workshop, and then I took in the main house. Built in the more medieval Chinese style that Liyue favored, the building was square with wide arches on the sides that marked where the 2 floors were, making the house look like it was almost just stacked atop one another, instead of being built together. I took a deep breath as my key slid home into the thick wooden door of the house, and with a heavy ominous clicking noise that vibrated like standing in front of a large speaker playing heavy bass. I opened the door with said door creating a damned unholy noise between a gator's snarling hiss of a growl, and one of those large bright yellow squeaker novelty ducks at prank stores. "Hello," I said unsurely, and in response, the house groaned as the door closed from behind me silently without that previous groaning noise or anything. "Nope," I said flatly, twisting on my heel and pulling at the door handle, but as though the door was literally fused shut, it didn't budge at all, and neither would the handle so much as a jiggle to give me the hope of breaking the door. For a split second, I considered taking out Fatebringer and dumping its clip into the door, but I shivered as the wooden floor I was standing upon creaked and I felt cold air almost caress the back of my neck. I woodenly turned my head, and as I did so, the first thing I thought was blue hair. And then as I refocused I realized A, this was the ghost and she was just staring at me not but a couple of feet away, and B, why the fuck was Chi-Chi a ghost instead of a zombie, and more importantly, an adult with tits? "Pork buns," I said, keeping my face calm as I held up the dinner I got from one of the street stalls, and her bright purple eyes blinked as she looked down at the pork buns that one could vaguely see through the crumpled up rice paper. Her head tilted to the side in confusion, and then her eyes snapped from my food and looked back to me as her lips opened and a smooth soft voice rang out. "You bought the property?" she asked quietly, with her voice being like a soft wind that caressed my ears with how little depth there was to the voice. I nodded slowly and held up the bronze key as I said straightforwardly, "Yup, I bought the house from the bank just today. I don't want any trouble, and I literally don't even have cultivation or anything, so we can be like roommates that don't bug one another," I said truthfully, and her head tilted to the other side as she seemingly took me in more seriously or just with more interest. "Ah. So you won't sneak into my room?" she mused to herself, and my lips twitched at how she almost sounded disappointed at not getting a meal delivered to herself that she could justify. "Nope, I will take a bedroom, and beyond me using the shed for my experiments I won't bug you at all," I said straightforwardly, and she put a finger to her lips as though my words were incomprehensible to herself. And then she questioned me again as though my answer would change. "You aren't using a treasure to hide your cultivation in order to sneak into my room and steal my vitaline?" she demanded with a heavy pressure falling on my shoulders. But I answered not angrily or even in a rush. I just flatly retorted, "Nope, hell no. I am only interested in women with a pulse, who can bear me children, and is willing to do some hand-holding or sharing a book while snuggling together up on a bed in front of a fire." Chi-Chi's face twitched from her overly serious and almost threatening previous posture, and for a moment there was silence, and then she said plainly, "You are the worst." And then she broke apart into motes of fading light that dissipated into nothingness. I just stared at where big titty Chi-Chi was previously. And then when nothing happened like her reforming, I went into the kitchen and ate my dumplings, and went to go check out the shed/guest house. I muttered, taking in a large single-room building, and saw that thankfully there were some easily popped open windows at the top that I could open with a hooked stick so I would get some ventilation. Also the floor was a good hard stone pad, so I didn't need to worry about some tiles or wooden floor buckling under the weight of whatever I brought in or built. I was happy enough with the large room, especially seeing a couple large heavy-duty tables against the wall, so with that done, I went back into Liyue to get the stuff I needed to start the tech tree. Solar is too fragile, finicky, and with Liyue being a port city, it often has cloud cover. I muttered as I went over possible forms of power generation, and then I shrugged as I had a good bit of money left, so I first went to the industrial section and made some orders for copper, zinc, tin, and a bunch of other metals I would need. Then went to the more niche alchemists to get some acids, and finally I went to a blacksmith to pick up a bunch of coal and some casts for ingots and plates of metals to be made. Finally, with all that done and I got home, I begin the process in bringing technology to this world. The easiest piece of technology that was used during the industrial age was in earnest. The Stirling engine. The engine ran off a system of using a direct heat source on the end of an almost closed container, and the pressure building within the container would force the gas within to expand and thus push the piston within to move. And simultaneously as the piston pushed down the tube, more air would be forced in completing the circuit as the motor piston would push the spokes of a wheel that would be then hooked up to a transformer to generate electricity. Now, using a small acetone or oil burner would make a single desk-mounted Stirling engine make a good 5 to 10 volts of electricity, but you could for one scale it up with hotter flames and some water added to the bottom of the piston space to keep the bottom cold to make the temperature reaction more violent. But there was nothing saying I couldn't jury-rig a dozen of these Stirling engines together to create even more power via combining the transformers to lead their power to a central battery. And that's what I did. For the entire rest of the day, I created a half-dozen working Stirling engines using the stuff I bought previously. Now how the fuck should I measure voltage without a voltmeter? I asked to myself as I realized that terrible little fact of life as the loud thrumming of the Stirling engines rang out, making my ears tinge a bit in pain. For a moment I considered doing the salt water test, but then realized I definitely had more than 50 volts. And getting to breathe bleach gas would be fucking stupid. So I got the materials in iron, aluminum, copper, and nickel, and then I ground the last 3 metals into a dust from the shavings I got, so I could make a paste out of the slurry that I then covered the iron rods in so I could make some really shitty welding sticks. Almost to godhood, Jake, not too much more bullshit, I muttered to myself as I kept in close mind the prototypes for the 3D printers used in Satisfactory that were absurdly durable and at their base. To me, with Satisfactory and Deep Rock Galactic technology all but beaten into my head, it was simple. In Satisfactory, the Explorer/World Harvester had this 3D printer gun and assembler that would sync up to a pocket dimension attached to the Explorer, and from there, they would be able to use the builder gun to build machines that would do the bulk of machinery, as the particle disassembler and reassemble could only use basic materials or finished products to make the machines. The one used in-game, which used spatial energies passively generated in the universe, was utterly beyond me in all senses of the world for its energy, which could within seconds make an entire space elevator out of materials. But the lesser versions that worked a good deal slower were within my reach. Basically, the most basic version of the build gun was essentially making a jumbo speaker array that would work in combination with a magnetic system that would melt down the metals under intense electromagnetic rays, while the audio waves would gently force atoms together to form the results I wished. So with Stirling engines making power, I began welding together a circular ring of speakers, which were just the bare-bones rings of conductive metal that would oscillate to make the audio waves. And then from there, I made a spiral ring of nickel so that when its magnetic field was activated would hold up a reactive piece of metal in the air and would be forced to spin at insane speeds while being cooked and made molten by the magnetic forces. Then, following the fucking weird science of Satisfactory, I somehow, and I do mean somehow, was able to use the jury-rigged speaker system to pulse at certain intervals at a stupidly high and deep bass level that actually made me feel ill and my vision to blur at the insane level of bass that came out of the speaker system that began shaping the molten metals into what I wanted. Oh, so fucking slowly. So as I left the visibly vibrating miniature house to let it work for a good bit, I saw Chi-Chi standing in front of the door with a large black umbrella held over her head to block off the fading twilight light from touching her form.